We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 41a. And the previous summer, the Gemara said it's a machlokas tanoim, whether you need a special limud by mitzorah to say that the shaving must be done with a razor, or if you don't need a special limud. And the Gemara said, according to the Rabbanan, you do not need a special limud, because the Rabbanan hold in general that the issur of destroying one's beard applies specifically to a razor. And if that is the case, then we understand that when the pasuk says by a mitzorah he has to shave, but it also adds that he has to shave his beard, even though that should have been included in shaving his entire body. Why does it specify beard? So the Gemara explained the reason why it specifies beard is because, again, there's a prohibition to shave the beard with a razor, and it must be we're saying that you must do the shaving by mitzorah with a razor as well, so you might have thought that the beard would be a problem, and so we're saying, no, it's not a problem. On the contrary, you have to do it, and you have to do it with a razor. And so the Gemara had asked on the previous summon, well, if that's the case, maybe all the pasuk means to say is that it's mutter to do it with a razor, but not that the mitzorah has to shave with a razor. It's mutter, even though there's a prohibition in general to shave the beard with a razor, but it's mutter by mitzorah. And the Gemara said, no, that cannot be the case. It can't just be simply saying that it's mutter for the mitzorah to use a razor, because number one, we would have learned that out from Nazir, because a Nazir also shaves his head. There's a prohibition of lo sakifu pa'as roshchem, and the Nazir's mitzvah to shave his head overrides that. So we would have known that the mitzorah's mitzvah also to shave his body, to shave the beard, would override. We would already know that it's mutter, and so therefore, again, the reason why it says specifically that the mitzorah shaves his beard is to say it's a mitzvah to shave the beard and a mitzvah to use a razor. And the Gemara adds an argument, v'suin further. Isalka daitach ki avid b'malket uvrhitni mitzvah ka'avid mideloch sivtar. If you think that by the mitzorah, if he uses other instruments to shave, let's say he uses tweezers to shave, let's say he uses a plane to shave, if you think that's a mitzvah from the fact that it doesn't say anything specifically about a razor, if that is the case, so then Reish Lakish, if you're going to follow Reish Lakish, the Reish Lakish says, Kol makom shata motze aseh velos aseh. He says a general rule, anytime you have a situation of an aseh that goes up against a los aseh, so if you can fulfill them both, that's actually preferable. Now, according to the Rabbanan, if it was really true that you can use other instruments, you don't have to use a razor by mitzorah, so then you'd be able to fulfill the mitzvah by mitzorah without violating the prohibition of shaving, because you just won't use a razor. Instead, what the mitzorah will do is he'll use another instrument. And so therefore, on the contrary, you would not have been allowed to use a razor. And if not, yavo aseh v'yirches los aseh. So then if there's no other solution, so then the aseh is docha the los aseh. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is that it cannot be that you're able to use a malket and rehitni, because if you are able to use a malket and rehitni, so then actually you would not be able to use a razor, according to Reish Lakish. And the fact that the pasuk is saying that you're even allowed to use a razor shows it must be specifically the mitzvah is only with a razor, and that's why you're allowed to use the razor, since that is the mitzvah. So the aseh is docha the los aseh. The aseh that the mitzorah has to shave his beard is docha the los aseh, that one is not allowed to destroy the beard with a razor. And the Gemara continues with Rabbi Eliezer. What about Rabbi Eliezer? Where is his source that a mitzorah has to use a razor? Again, this is because Rabbi Eliezer holds the prohibition of destroying one's beard applies with any instrument. And so therefore, the fact that it says beard by mitzorah, it's obvious why it needs to say beard, because you might think that's a problem because it's prohibited to destroy the beard with any instrument, and therefore the pasuk has to say that the mitzorah shaves all of the hair on his body, including his beard. But still, we don't have a source that the mitzorah specifically has to use a razor. So my time, and what's his reason? And to that the Gemara says, Yolef me rosho. He learns it out from Rosho. This is the Rosho that is said by the mitzorah. The Tanya, because we learned in a Braisa Rosho, it says that again the mitzorah shaves. It says he shaves his whole body, but then it says his beard. It also says his head. Why does it have that extra word, his head? It's included in his whole body. So Matamad Lomer, what's the point of saying Rosho? Lefishanemar gabe Nazir. The reason is as follows: since it says by Nazir, Tar lo yavral Rosho, it says that the Nazir is not allowed to shave while he is a Nazir. It says he's not allowed to use a razor on his head. Yachol af nazir mitzorah. Now I might think the same is true, let's say, by a nazir who's a mitzorah, meaning to say a mitzorah has to shave. It's a mitzvah for the mitzorah to shave. So what does a person do if he's a nazir and a mitzorah? Is he also not allowed to shave? Does he not fulfill the mitzvah by mitzorah? Talmud lomar rosho. That's why the pasuk is saying rosho. The pasuk is saying no. Even when you have a situation of a mitzorah who, in general, had he not been a mitzorah, it would have been a problem. It would have been tar lo yavra rosho. He wouldn't be allowed to use a razor. So by the mitzorah, he is allowed to. And you see from that, we're talking specifically about a razor. Just like the prohibition by nazir is tar lo yavra rosho. so too by Mitzorah, the mitzvah is specifically a tar. The Gemara asked the same question it asked before within the Rabbanan. Mimai, how do you know that's what the pasuk means when it says Rosho? Maybe it's not saying you have to use a razor, maybe it's saying you're able to use one. Maybe by the Mitzorah, even if it used some other instrument, it would be a mitzvah, even if it used a tweezers or a plane. And if you're going to say, so tar, lamali, lamemra, what do we need to say the word tar for? We mean to say, diafilu betar. We mean to say he's even allowed to use the razor. Because you might have thought, that since by a Nazir he's not allowed, there's a chiyav, he's not allowed to use a tar, he can't use a razor. So gabe mitzora nami l'chayev. So by mitzora also, that should be a problem. Kamash malon. Maybe that's all the pasuk is saying. The pasuk is saying Rosho to say he's allowed to use a razor. And the Gemara says, similar to before, no, if you thought to say that you're allowed to use other instruments and that fulfills the mitzvah by mitzorah, midelochas of tar, because it doesn't say explicitly tar by mitzorah, so then Resh Lakish, then you'd run into the problem by Resh Lakish, because then on the contrary, you should have to use the malkit and rehitni, you should have to use the other instruments, because it's a situation where you have the ability to fulfill the aseh without violating any los aseh. You're able to fulfill the aseh, the shaving of the mitzorah, and you don't violate anything by the nazir if you're not using a tar. So therefore you wouldn't actually even be allowed to use a tar. And so therefore it must be that what the pasuk is saying on the contrary, the mitzvah specifically is to use a razor, and that's what the pasuk is teaching. Use a razor even in a situation where the mitzorah is also a nazir. And the Gemara continues, V'Rabbanan and the Rabbanan, Hai Rosho, my Darshi Bey, what do they do with the word Rosho by Mitzorah? Again, we understand why it says Zakana, why it says beard, because you might think there's a prohibition of destroying the beard with a razor, and so it says Zakana to say Mitzorah has a mitzvah specifically to shave the hair of the beard with a razor. The question is, why does it say Rosho? Again, if a Mitzorah is shaving all the hair on the body, what does it need to specify his head? And the Gemara answers, Miboilu, they need it for the following, Lemidchi lav ta hakafa, to push off the lav of hakafa that's rounding out the corners of one's head, what we refer to as the payas. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brayso, lo sakifa pas roshchem, it says that you're not allowed to round out the corners of your head. Yachalaf mitzorah kein. I might think that applies to mitzorah. Maybe he shouldn't cut that hair as well. Talmud lomar rosho. That's why the pasuk says rosho again, to say that the mitzvah on the mitzorah to shave the hair of his entire body includes paas roshchem. And the Gemara continues, Lamali l'michtav Rosho, but what is the need to write the word Rosho? V'teipuk le mizakano. Why not just learn it out from Zakano? Once we know that the Mitzorah shaves the beard, we should apply it to the Pa'as Rosho as well. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso Zakano, it says again, why does it say beard? Matam and Lomer, what's the need for that word in the Pasuk? Lifi shenemar, because the Pasuk says, Pa'as Zakanim lo yigalechu, it says that you're not allowed to shave the corners of the beard. Yachol af Mitzorah kain, so I might think that's true by Mitzorah. Talmud lomar Zakano, that's why the Pasuk says Zakano. And so the Gemara says, Lamali l'mechtav Rosho, v'lamali l'mechtav Zakano. What do you need both? Why does the pasuk need to say Rosho and Zakano? Once we know one, wouldn't we know the other? But the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Tzricha, it is needed. The kasav Rachmon is Zakano. If the pasuk wrote Zakano v'lo kasav Rosho and didn't say Rosho, have amina. So I might have thought hakafas kol Rosh lo shma hakafa. Maybe if somebody rounds out the entire head, meaning if someone's already shaving everything on his head, maybe that's not an isser. Maybe that's not called hakafa anymore, and therefore that's why it's allowed by mitzorah. I might not realize that that's a prohibition that we're overriding. Maybe there is no prohibition in such a case. La'achi kasav Rachmon Rosho. That's why it says Rosho, to say there is a prohibition, but we're overriding that prohibition, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis.